All right, here we go. Special coverage here on SNY. I'm Jim Buquette alongside Andy Martino. The Mets are getting set to introduce their new general manager, Billy Eppler. We'll also hear from Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson. Before we do that, before we go out to that press conference, Andy, how did we get here? This was a little bit of a roller coaster route here to get to the general manager here with Billy Eppler. How did the Mets end up settling on Epler?
Yeah, it was a long and winding path to this day, as you know, Jim, in a way that surprised the Mets a little bit. It took a little bit longer, and they went through a couple of more rejections of them and rejections by them than they expected. A lot of candidates that we cycled through. But what's interesting is that they ended up close to the place where they began, where they wanted an experienced guy with a name. I mean, the first three names were obviously the Billy Beane, Theo Epstein, and David Stearns category. And Epler may not have been on that list, but he is a guy who has New York experience, who has GM experience, who has a personality that is suited to New York. So he came along late in the process, and it was really only somebody who they started really digging on and talking to within the 4 or 5 days of the decision. It was something that happened pretty quickly in that regard. But again, they came back around somewhere close to where they started on this.
You know, I think it's interesting, too, because that New York background, obviously under the Yankees, that scouting background, international scouting background, that's a part of it. Being a general manager, a prior general manager experience, I think that also weighs into it when you look at his experience. Your other strengths, and I've known Billy a long time too, but why don't you, from your perspective, the strengths that made him the candidate for the Mets?
Well, what Sandy Alderson, Jim, as you know, was looking to do when he came back was to sort of dial back the over-reliance on analytics that he kind of started in this game 40 years ago when he brought Bill James into the Oakland A's front office. He felt like it had become too Ivy League, too numbers-driven a little bit, and he wanted to overcorrect. So that's where Jared Porter actually came from. Jared Porter and Zach Scott a year ago were the finalists. They chose Porter because he had more of a scouting background. Epler has that scouting background with the analytics, right. So they like that balance.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, listen, the news conference is getting underway. Let's take you out there now.
All the different Mets social channels and MLB Network. Thank you all again for joining. We're going to begin today's conference by introducing Mets President Sandy Alderson for some remarks. Sandy, please.
Thanks, Harold, and thanks, everybody. On behalf of myself, Steve, the organization, thanks for participating with us today. It's my real pleasure to announce that Billy Eppler is the new general manager of the New York Mets. Billy has over 20 years of experience in the game, a variety of positions, including assistant general manager, tremendous and lengthy experience in the New York market. He understands the challenges that New York represents in terms of its fans, who are knowledgeable and passionate and demanding, as well as the big stage. So we're very happy that Billy is going to be with us. He's well respected in the organization, in the industry, well known within the organization, and we're extremely happy to have him. And he will have remarks here shortly. A couple of things I want to touch on before I turn it over to Billy. One is the process in which we ultimately selected Billy. This was not a linear process. This was not a matter of making inquiries, making offers on a serial basis. Billy is the only one who received an offer from Steve and the Mets. It was an exhaustive process. We talked to many people, and we're very happy that as a result, Billy is our new general manager. Secondly, I want to talk about the vetting process in connection with our search. It also was exhaustive. It was broader, deeper than any vetting process we had ever undergone. It involved not only inquiries with respect to those in the industry, those for whom he had worked, but also those with whom he had worked in an organization or outside the organization, the media, for example. So very happy that Billy is with us. It was a long process in terms of baseball calendar, but necessary, and we're very pleased with the outcome, and look forward to Billy hitting the ground running. So with that, I want to turn it over to Billy for his remarks.
Good. Thank you, Sandy. First off, I'd like to thank everybody for being on the call. I know this week has probably been trying for you since the news broke Monday afternoon. And so I appreciate your patience and hanging in there with me as we work through this. So I'm tremendously excited to be here and be part of the Mets organization. I'd like to thank Steve and Alex Cohen for giving me this opportunity. In our conversations as we went through this process and this dialogue, it was evident every step of the way that they're committed to building a championship caliber organization from top to bottom. I would also like to thank Sandy for your guidance and your support during the process, and know that I'm excited to be able to work alongside you, getting a chance to position myself with someone with your resume and baseball acumen is something I look forward to. To the Met fans, man, I cannot wait to connect with you in person. So I'll take you back to my first game, seeing the Mets in 2005 at Shea Stadium. It was my first exposure in person. I felt your passion. I witnessed the electricity of the environment, and I'm sitting in the scout seats behind home plate, and I'm looking around the stadium and thinking to myself, this is what a baseball game was intended to look like. And just know that I look at the role of our baseball operations department as one to serve you, and we realize that we have a duty and an obligation to you, and we will take that seriously. As far as our vision for the Mets organization moving forward, we want to build and drive a culture that promotes an inclusive and collaborative environment that is defined by high operational standards. And I just want to reiterate that again, I'm thrilled to be here because, along with the 2009 World Series championship, this is a career highlight for me. And again, to the fans, we have a sizable list of things to do right now, from a managerial hire to coaching staff hires to free agency and trade market. We're going to kick it into high gear as soon as we actually wrap up here today. So thanks for hanging with me through this process. And again, I look forward to getting to work here with everybody throughout baseball operations.
Thank you very much, Billy. And thank you, Sandy. For all those intending to ask a question, a reminder that please use your raise your hand tab at the bottom of the screen. It's once you're called upon, if you could state your name and affiliation and who your question is intended for. And of course, you've got Sandy Alderson and Billy Eppler, as well as owner Steve Cohen, all available to you. We're going to begin with the first question coming from Steve Gelbs. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks a lot, Harold. Yep, Steve Gelbs here from SNY. And my first question is for Billy. First of all, congrats and welcome to the Mets. You mentioned that you've got a sizable list of things to do, pretty much right away. This is obviously a roster that over the last number of years has been expected to compete and for some reason just hasn't met those high expectations. When you look at this group, what are the areas that you feel you really do need to address this offseason? And, I guess just overall, how much of an overhaul or a change do you feel that you guys are going to need going into next season?
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate the question, and good to see you again. As far as our approach for this offseason, we want to tackle the free agent market as well as the trade market. We want to look for opportunities in my dialogue with Steve and Sandy, it's evident that we're going to have some resources behind us. So I don't think anything eliminates itself at the outset here. And I look at the roster and definitely want to address the pitching. We've had player recently signed somewhere else in Noah, and just really want to reinforce the overall depth. We also are going to entertain things in the outfield and entertain things in the infield. But after this call, or shortly after this call, and some of the other obligations I have today, with respect to the media, I'm going to connect with the senior baseball operations group, and I want to hear from them, like what they think, and what ideas they have, and hit the ground running this afternoon and start. I'm still on West Coast time, so I've got a little bit longer day, and just start connecting with agents and teams. And I haven't, even over this last year, I haven't really unplugged from from a lot of my GM colleagues. I still have talked to them, throughout the last calendar year. So I'm just looking forward to plugging in and addressing this roster. But I think you can walk away from this knowing that we're going to be aggressive, and we're going to attack the pitching, infield, and outfield. So kind of all of the above.
Thanks. And Steve, I have one more for you. I remember last year, after you went through this process for the first time, you said you were somewhat surprised at how difficult it was to find some people for the front office, specifically, for the president of baseball operations. Obviously, you guys ran into some similar roadblocks this year and pivoted again towards just filling that GM role. What was your takeaway from the process this go round? Did you expect to have similar pushback, or did the difficulties catch you a bit off guard again?
Well, I mean, when you say pushback, I think there are lots of reasons why people decide that they're just not available. They're comfortable where they are. Their wives and kids are at a certain age where they don't want to move. We're coming out of COVID. There's still some, people just are still a little bit uncomfortable at this point. Moving to perhaps a big city, given COVID concerns. And so, that's understandable. People have contracts, right? I mean, let's not forget that. So, contracts are, they're contracts, right? I mean, contracts for a reason. I mean, when I give somebody a contract, I expect them to honor it too. So, it's not, there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to make it work at the time that is, where you're looking. What I can say is I'm really excited about working with Billy. Just to give you a little feedback, I came back from the MLB owner meetings, and I can tell you that just universal praise for the hiring. I mean, people coming up to me from everywhere saying that we got a real pro, well liked in the industry, well respected. And so, listen, I'm excited. Listen, I put a lot of time into this, and I always say, I've got a day job, so it's a relief to get somebody that I feel really good about. And just based on our conversations, I think it's going to be, he's going to be an easy person to work with. So I really look forward to the whole team getting going here and filling our needs.
Good. Thank you, Steve. Bill Ladson, your line is open.
Bill Ladson, MLB.com. Congratulations, Billy. Billy, I got to ask you, what kind of manager are you looking for? Are you looking for a guy who has analytic, thinking, or is it old school, or both?
Thanks for the question, Bill, and I'm glad you asked it. Actually, I'd love to find somebody that checks every single box and is great in all areas. But it's interesting that you bring it up because over this past year, just learning and reading and kind of like rethinking some of the ways that you approach things. I wanted to be able to sit down with the senior baseball ops group, and then sit down with Steve and Sandy, and kind of all collectively talk about what kind of criteria we think might be important for, the next manager of the Mets. And so that's a process that I'm going to start this afternoon. I have a little bit of my own feeling on that, but I'd rather hold back on giving exactly what that criteria is at this moment in time, because I want to have the group engage and get a sense for do you value, for example, tactical in-game management as your primary your primary criteria, your primary element? Do you value analytic in-game probabilistic thinking as your number one criteria, or do you manage ability to connect with the media and the fan base? Obviously, that's critical, and clubhouse culture. So all of these things, do you want somebody that coached in the minor league, for example? So I want to make sure I collect all of the thoughts from everybody, set forth what that criteria looks like, and then at that point, start to develop a candidate list.
I have one more question. How do you change the culture in the clubhouse and on the field? The reason why I'm asking, because the last 2 years, the Mets were supposed to win and they finished under 500. How do you change that culture?
I think a lot of that comes from the coaching staff and from the players themselves. When you have an environment where people feel that they can be vulnerable with each other, where they feel that they can trust one another, that there's almost like this element of psychological safety where you're not afraid to speak your mind, and that if you do speak your mind, that there's not going to be any repercussions behind that. So I think as you just kind of create that culture, that people start to feel more comfortable as they move forward.
Thank you. Disha, your line is open.
Hey, Billy, Disha Thosar with the New York Daily News. Just one question for you and then one for Steve. The offense featured a lot of underperforming players this past season, and just in general, it's a roster that hasn't played to its talent level. So how do you balance trusting them all to bounce back versus getting value if you traded some of them?
Thanks, Disha. So, the process that we'll look at when evaluating our offense is, what are the underlying process metrics that are kind of driving their performance, and was there an element of unluckiness? Do we expect that that the numbers on the back of the baseball card are maybe not in fact the real numbers that we would expect from that player to contribute? There's an element of or I guess a framework for players that I tend to gravitate to, and I don't think this is really that unique or proprietary, because it's become kind of mainstay in baseball. But just to kind of get a little bit more granular on that, looking for players that are really good decision makers in the batter's box. They understand their swing decisions, and if a ball's over the white, that they're ready to attack it. And so a little bit more of a patiently but aggressive approach at the same time. And obviously, as far as team building is concerned in general, we're just going to try to really, really grow the run differential of the club as much as we can.
And then for Steve, both you and Sandy have stated a commitment to changing the culture of the Mets. With all due respect to Billy, in his last role, he ran an organization that brought in Mickey Callaway and saw a high-ranking employee indicted for providing opiates to players. So how do you just sort of reconcile the two? And is it something that you've talked about with Billy?
Well, we've done our due diligence, and it's an organization. Billy's just one person in that organization. We vetted it, in multiple ways. We spoke to a lot of people that were around the organization at that time. We spoke to people within baseball, and we're incredibly comfortable with Billy and his decision making and his ethics. and his integrity.
Thank you, Steve. Dave, we'll come to you next. Your line's open.
Hey, Billy, congratulations and welcome back.
Thanks, Dave. Good to see you.
To this side of town, anyway. Billy, with a lockout looming, you know, we've seen some push in the industry already to get some players signed, and I think there could be some more. Do you feel that you have to kind of get moving on some player acquisition? And that said, you know, can the manager hire wait? You know, because you are looking at a situation where there could be a transaction freeze. And do you feel an urgency to do the player side first and maybe worry about the manager side later on?
Great question, Dave. And again, good to see you, man. Last night I was starting to get a lot of texts from agents, and I responded to a lot of them, saying you'll hear from me today. So yeah, I'm going to plug right into that. Absolutely, and look forward to engaging with those guys again on their players. And as far as the manager process, I don't expect it to be done overnight, or even be done in the next week. And I know we're about to embark on a holiday week, but starting to have those conversations and carve out time, each day to meeting a candidate, I think can be done simultaneously. Just as you manage your time, connecting with these agents, though, will be going on this afternoon.
Great. Thanks, Billy. And just one more for Sandy and Steve, if I could. Sandy, I know you described this position as potentially a one-year runway. It's not now. It's a 4-year deal for Billy, obviously. What did that change? You feel a lot more comfortable now giving Billy kind of a full autonomy to run the baseball situation that maybe you didn't before you talked to him and decided that he was the guy?
Well, first of all, I think the 1-year runway may have been misunderstood. I think that originally this offseason we were looking for 2 hires. We ended up with 1, as we did last year. And as I told Zach Scott last year, there's an opportunity here for a year at least to establish yourself, to grow to the point where we may not even do a search a year from now for an additional person or an additional person above the general manager role. So we will have a year's experience, and Steve and I will take a look at that at the end of the season, and Steve will make a decision about the direction he wants to go. But Billy has lots of opportunity here to establish himself, to grow, and have an impact on that decision a year from now.
Thank you, Sandy. Ed Coleman, we'll come to you next. Your line's open.
Hey, Billy, welcome back to New York.
Thanks, Ed.
You come from a scouting background, and analytics are becoming much more important in the game as well. But how do you weigh the eye test as an evaluator with the numbers that you're provided with every day, and to try to get the right blend?
Yeah, great question, Ed. And I'm glad you asked it because it comes up fairly regularly. So when we're looking at an evaluation on a player, we're going to take every angle and kind of walk, 360 degrees around that player. And there's there's many actual elements of things that you can gather and glean from a player that are not picked up via the analytics platform, whether it's the radar tracking or some of the kinematic tracking that is available in the game now. But ultimately, watching how a player responds and how a player behaves to certain game situations, how their body reacts to things, those elements can never be incorporated, via the analytic platform. One of my mentors in Gene Michael, who was very Yeah, I guess, very instrumental in kind of teaching me or growing me, just outside of the traditional qualitative assessment where you talk about, hit and hit for power and run and field and throw, et cetera, but really taught me about trying to evaluate a player's concentration or focus. And I've used this comparison a number of times that, he would look at hitters a lot in the on deck circle and try to see how they were approaching or how they looked in the on deck circle, and then how their body perhaps reacted to pitches or how an infielder moved. And so when I say how an infielder moved, I'm not just talking about how quick they move, but how soon they move or an angle that they take to the ball. And so taking those qualitative assessments and finding a way to formalize them, put them down on paper, and then integrate them with some of the information that you're getting that's more quantitative based, such as spin rates and batted ball trajectories and all these things. And when you can really put all of that together and then spit out a projection for a player, I think that's when you feel that you have all the tools at your disposal. And so that's kind of the process for evaluating a player that we'll go through.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Next up, we'll go to Justin Descano.
Justin Descano, Bergen record. I've got one for Billy and then one for Steve. So first for Billy, congratulations. And I'm wondering, throughout the last decade, as you kind of worked your way up through baseball, what was your perception of the Mets from afar?
Thanks, Justin, and good to see you again, man. So my perception of the Mets from afar was an organization that had this, rabid fan base that cared and wanted to see their club do great things. And for reasons that happen in a lot of places, your depth gets challenged. And personally, that's one of my bigger takeaways over the last 10 years in baseball is just that importance of depth. I also suffered similarly at times when that was tested and you didn't have places to turn to, and it's just not easy to go execute a trade, especially when the news gets out that you might have a hole on your roster. All of a sudden the supply and demand trade-off definitely takes effect in that. But all in all, the resources that I talked to Steve about being able to have here give me a really good feeling that we'll be able to shore up some of those depth issues and really build a comprehensive best in class scouting operation, player development operation, performance and performance science and analytics operation. So those departments will ultimately drive the long-term success of the organization.
Thank you. And then for Steve, in your conversations with Billy throughout the process, what struck you most about his vision?
Well, I mean, like I said in the opening comments, we're dealing with someone with a vast array of experiences. He's a pro. I mean, he knows a lot about the game. He's, worked under some, really good people. So we were just impressed by his communication skills, his knowledge of the game. I think the players in the locker room are going to just enjoy communicating with him, talking to him. And so I think he brings a lot, different skill sets to the table. And I think that's what this organization needed.
Thank you, Steve. Tim Britton, your line is open.
Hey, this first question is for Sandy, and then I've got one for Billy. I'm Tim Britton with The Athletic. For Sandy, you've talked abstractly about what your role would be before the team had hired a general manager. Now that Billy's in place, what do you envision as your role in baseball operations?
Well, good question. Billy will be reporting to me, but just as I talked about, the opportunity for growth, I think that, we will certainly consult with one another, but I expect Billy to be driving this operation. I will be available as a resource. And as time goes on, what I would expect is that, Billy will have even more latitude than he will have immediately. But as time goes on, I would expect that latitude will expand, and that, my role will diminish. So I don't expect to be heavily involved, but I will be available to Billy, and whatever input he desires, I'll provide. And as time goes on, I think his, as I said, his role will expand.
Thanks. And then for Billy, when you hear Sandy talk about having, a 1-year opportunity at least to show that you're that they don't need to make an additional hire potentially above you, how does that make you feel about the opportunity?
Well, that was conversation that we had, throughout this past week, and how that would go. And, in my conversations with Sandy, I understood that, this is not necessarily, a one-person job, but also understanding the importance of, how, I particularly, look at the world, as far as valuation of players, organizational philosophy, so on and so forth. And so, we know that if that opportunity exists, in the future, that I will have a role in the process, with Sandy and Steve, and if that comes to pass, then I would welcome that opportunity, because I know that it'll be somebody that kind of looks at the world similar, or looks at the baseball world, I should say, similar to how I do.
Dan Martin, your line is open.
Hey, Billy. Coming from your stint with the Angels, what do you take from those 5 years? And obviously there wasn't a ton of success there. So what do you think you learned from that previous stint with Anaheim?
Yeah. So Dan, good to see you again. Thanks for the question, man. So, upon arrival in Anaheim, there was this kind of convergence of circumstances. We had this, depleted farm system, which I think Keith Law described at the time as by far the worst he's ever seen. And there was a little bit of a move away from international talent. The club was in the penalty box in 15 and 16, meaning the penalty box, would mean, they couldn't sign any higher value international free agents. Their spending was capped on the amount of a bonus they could give to one particular player. And then there was some sizable contracts, parked on the major league roster. So, the lack of depth, I guess, made us dip into, into free agency to fill multiple holes on the roster. And when you're thin on that depth, any injuries you sustain, I should say, really make you fall through the ice. And we were having some successes early in 17 and 18, and then we'd be slammed with 2 season-ending injuries on the pitching staff. And quite frankly, we couldn't recover. That's why I alluded even earlier to the depth. That's a major takeaway. And then on the free agent front, we pursued, mainly shorter term and lower AAV deals, because we had multiple holes that needed to be filled. And we did that, in an effort to not really double down on some of the contracts that maybe were on their later years or the downslope years. But those free agent deals, they didn't work out, or a number of those deals didn't work out. and it was done, I guess, in position, or it was done in an effort to position the club for real spending capability in 2020 and 2021, et cetera, as some of like the prospects that we took in, 16, 17, 18 drafts might be able to merge in. So, I didn't think at that moment in time in free agency that, if I reflect back on 17, 18, 19, that we really had a real, chance to kind of overtake Houston. So played a little bit of a safer, and didn't want to burden the organization long term. But like I said, a number of those free agent deals didn't work out. So my biggest takeaway is the importance of depth. That would be, at least as far as constructing a major league roster. That's my biggest takeaway.
And from the Callaway hiring, I mean, when you reflect on that, based on what happened, is there anything that you can take from that, going forward and in the process of going through candidates, whether it's for managers or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, the industry in general, as Sandy and Steve alluded to, has a vetting process that's evolved, and we have greater resources because of it. In general, the Angel organization has been asked and have answered for it. And there's not really anything more specific I can add today. Just that, like I said, that industry vetting process has evolved.
Tyler Kepner, your line is open.
All right. Hey, Billy, good to see you again, man. Congratulations.
Hey, Tyler, good to see you too.
My question is for Steve. What did you learn from this, first full year, at the head of the Mets, and how do you think your role will change or evolve compared to what it was this year?
Yeah, I think the major learning was if you're going to be in first place for 100 days, try to do it at the end of the season, not the middle of the season. I mean, that would be helpful. Listen, it's a first year. There's a lot of learnings. I'm just getting acquainted with baseball, getting up to speed on the language, getting up to speed on, just all the little intricacies. I mean, for an industry that's not a big industry, there's a lot of moving parts in running a baseball team, whether it's analytics, whether it's technology, whether it's, all sorts of player development and health. And so there's a lot of moving parts there, and which is why it's really important that we build all of these areas out and find the best and brightest and it's what is my job? My job is to provide the resources, find the people who can run these areas with Sandy, and find these people. So and then let them do their thing. Okay, I mean, it's not my job to dictate who the players are going to be. My job is to, when they come to me, is to say, yeah, let's do it. Let's spend on this. Let's make this trade. I agree. But I want to delegate out to my people. I want to give them a lot of rope, and let them make decisions. I mean, ultimately, if you're going to interfere in every decision, it's not going to work. At least that's how I've run my other businesses, and that's done well. And I expect to run it the same way here. And that's sort of the plan. You're not going to fix everything the first year. I call it a little bit of a treasure hunt. As you go through the organization, you find things that you need to fix, and that's sort of what I would have expected coming into an organization that was under-resourced. And we're in the process. We've made progress last year. There are areas that I would say we've made significant hires and devoted resources to, and there's probably other areas we can do more of this year. And that's the goal. The goal is to, like I said at the beginning, to build an organization top down, a top-notch organization that can sustain winning year in, year out.
How do you plan to use Twitter going forward? And was that sort of overemphasized or misunderstood at sometimes?
What do you mean misunderstood?
Well, like, what is the influence of your whatever messages you put out there? Were people emphasizing that too much?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. Maybe it was novel, right? I mean, owners haven't really done much of that. And so it was new, it was novel. It was also, I was trying to connect with the fans. And I actually think I was pretty successful at that. I think just getting feedback from people from the ballpark and around the area saying, yeah, they really enjoy it. They actually appreciate that type of interaction with the owner. Twitter's a tough place to do it in general because it tends to be combative, as you know. All of you who are tweeting out there, you can imagine, what the comments are. And so it's a tough place to get your message across. And so we'll see. I mean, I'm a busy guy, and there was a lot of that was during COVID. And, and so I'll continue to tweet, probably not as much as I did previously. Especially during the search, I wanted to respect the candidacies of the potential, people we were talking to, and didn't want to make it a public search. And so didn't want to turn this into a game of some kind. Now, in the end, the media is interested in finding out what we're doing. And so it becomes a public search, and I was trying to keep it as private as possible. I try to stay off of Twitter as part of that. And so now that's over, I'll probably get back on and give it another shot and see how it goes. But, we'll see. I think people like it, so why not keep going?
Next up will be Ryan Field.
Ryan Field, ABC7 here in New York. Steve, this question is for you. You talk about lessons learned when you think about your first go round into free agency. Were there any takeaways that maybe have caused you to change your approach this time around? And what would make this a successful offseason in your eyes?
Well, I mean, listen, I'm going to listen to our people and their recommendations. They're going to be, I expect to, our budget today, without even signing anybody, is already at 185 million or so. So, and we have, if we're going to find the right type of talent, it's going to probably be either trades with other clubs or free agents. We don't really have a lot in our farm system to supplement what we need. And so it's going to require probably spending. And that's what's going to happen. And I've let Billy know that I'm willing to, for the right deals and the right free agents, to go and get the players we need. We want to be competitive, right? We want to win our division and be in the playoffs and get deep into the playoffs, right? So if we've got to field a team that has the ability to do that. And so I've let Billy and Sandy know that it's whatever they need. And I'm open to their suggestions and recommendations. And the goal is to put a very competitive team on the field.
Brad Heller, your line is open.
Brad Heller, WCBS 880. This question's for Billy. First of all, congratulations. Sandy mentioned your experience in New York as being a big part of a big positive on your resume in landing this job. Looking at that experience, what do you take away? What specifics that you think can help you in this position?
Thanks, Brad. So New York, magical place. Awesome. I came here in 2005, and I was born in Southern California and did some time in Connecticut for college, and a little time in Denver, a little time in Tampa, and then I got to New York, and it was something. Big buildings, it's intimidating. It makes you feel really small. But as you go and you learn and evolve, the city starts to teach you. I think the city teaches patience. I think the city teaches resiliency and humility, and there's really no other place like it. And it's special, and I missed it. I didn't miss an opportunity to come back if my former club was playing out here. Because I did. I missed the city, and so you learn about how the fans care about their club, and you see the gear as you're walking through town. You see the replay maybe on the up on the TV if you're walking back to your apartment or back to your home, and you just feel this. I started to feel this sense of responsibility to the fan base that they're wearing the gear, they're watching the games, they're completely invested. So you have a duty to them. And it felt like this just awesome responsibility. And that's my takeaway from New York is that I have this responsibility, and this whole baseball operations and our players, we just have this responsibility. And it's fun to have it and to plug in. So, that's kind of my takeaway from my time in New York.
And one more, if I may, your experience on the other side, on the agency side for the couple of months, learn any tricks of the trade that might help you as you start making those phone calls, maybe even later today and over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, maybe a couple. No, actually, when I made the decision to join that group, it was a unique opportunity to walk into this major, humongous talent agency with a massive platform and loads of resources and tools. And it was, we were going to be allowed to really innovate and push in the player development and care space. And those are things that, that I really enjoy doing. And they're building this comprehensive platform to really serve their athletes. And frankly, a lot of what they were asking me to do was fairly similar to being a general manager, maybe more so to being like a scouting director as well as a player development director. But in my time there, you do learn, you do learn things, and it was a good experience, absolutely. And I thank those guys for giving me that opportunity, and they're going to do something special.
Randy Miller, your line is open.
Hi, Billy. Last night, Brian Cashman talked about you getting the job, raved about the job that you did working for him. I'm wondering what you learned from Brian, and also what are your thoughts on being the rival GM to him now? And the Yankees and Mets haven't made many trades over the years. Because of your relationship, could you possibly see more talks of trades coming down the road?
Thanks, Randy. It's interesting that you bring that up because, over the years, we never made any trades, even when I was with the Angels. And I think it's because we maybe have some similar methodologies for valuing players, which wouldn't be a shocker. I'm not really expecting to do a lot of transactions, but as far as the dialogue, we have a regular dialogue. I think even over the past year, we don't go a week without talking to each other. And he was a tremendous mentor to me, and somebody that means a lot. So as far as like what I learned there, being there for 11 years and having the success that we did, I just walked into I just approached that job as much of a sponge as I could be, right? There were so many people there to learn from throughout that organization. I mentioned Stick and Damon Oppenheimer and Mark Newman and Donnie Roland and just people that were leading different departments and kind of understanding how they looked at things, and then really working in lockstep with Michael Fishman and trying to integrate our processes for qualitative evaluating and quantitative evaluating. And so I just take so much of kind of just the operational methodology away from there, and look forward to to continuing to evolve and grow from those experiences. But as far as Brian's impact on me, it's been monumental, and I appreciate him for that.
Thank you, Billy. Barry Bloom will come to you next.
Hi, guys. Nice to see you all again. Billy, congratulations. I think it would be remiss for me to not congratulate you on the evolution of Ohtani and where he went this year. And you were the guy who took the chance on him with a grade 1 tear in his elbow back then, and he really came to fruition with everything last night. So congratulations on that too. As far as the questions go, getting back to the labor situation, with all the things that you want to do, in the off season, if you wind up having a work stoppage in a week or so, how does that affect all of it? And maybe from Steve's point of view, you just came from an owners meeting. Where are the owners on this right now with 11 days to go towards the deadline?
Well, I mean, I leave the negotiating to the commissioner and his and the people doing the negotiating up there, and obviously, doing what they need to do, and we'll see what happens. I let them handle that. And
I'll piggyback, Barry, and circle back with with the answer to your question as far as how we would approach the winter time. And again, thanks for the congratulations, but they really go to Shohei. So a remarkable year, and I'm proud of him and happy for him. But as far as the off season is concerned in general, I mean, most of the time in a traditional off season, which hopefully starts November 1, because you're playing so deep, you're gonna start and engage in free agency, absent in any coaching staff decisions that you have to make, and you engage in that free agency, and then you engage in the trade market, and you even start dialogue with other teams even in October, even if you're still playing, to get a sense of what maybe clubs want to do during the wintertime. And you evolve through the marketplace, and you have your initial conversations, and you get a sense of the expectations of some of the players and the comfort level with some of the players as far as playing in your market, or in a lot of cases these guys are going to be moving around, and so you want to see if there's a family dynamic or what have you that maybe would dissuade them from moving. And then as you kind of gain all that information and evolve through the off season, you then start getting into a time before spring training where you can really dive into processes, player development processes, because now you're on the verge of collecting everybody back for spring training, and you want to see, do we want to rethink how we do things, and do we want to implement a new processes? So if we're faced with a period where we have to kind of move that order of operations around, that's a really long-winded way of saying there's plenty to do, and coming in day one into an organization, I have to do a lot of listening, and a lot of listening to learn, and so that's what I would spend all of my time doing.
Very good. I believe we have time for one more. Pat Regazzo, your line is open.
Pat Regazzo of Sports Illustrated. Welcome back to New York, Billy, and congratulations. You mentioned during your last stint with the Angels where, a lack of depth kind of caused you to try and fill holes in free agency. And, Steve and Sandy mentioned, the lack of depth in the farm system right now. So how do you avoid, kind of making those same mistakes and going down that path again this time around when there are clearly holes to fill, while also trying to build up the farm system?
Yeah, great question. And thanks, Pat. Good to see you. So ultimately, there's some strength in this farm system. As I looked at it, there's a number of guys that are top 100 prospects, but we don't want to move them. In the conversations with Steve and getting a sense to understand our resources, we'll be able to take a little bit bigger swings in free agency. Like I alluded to at the start, I don't think anything's ruled out right now. And so that's gonna provide a little bit more operational runway to look at potentially a different class of player in free agency. And just so we can talk a little bit more in detail on the organizational trajectory and maybe what we're going to try to do is we really want to center our framework for decision making here around maximizing our cumulative World Series odds over a long-term time horizon. So what that means is like a great team maybe starts the season with this 15-16%. I'm talking like the best team, maybe a 15-16% chance of winning the World Series. And then you have these really good teams that are probably going to be over around 10-12% chance of winning the World Series. And if we make our decisions in service of maximizing and building those odds, and we build that over this several year time horizon, then we create sustainability. And then the free agent spending can be born more out of opportunity than necessity. And so making those decisions and having the organizational discipline to avoid impulsive decisions that maybe give up large amounts of future World Series odds in exchange for some smaller gains right now. We want to avoid those decisions. And so a way to do that is to make sure you hold on to the prospects that you have, which, in turn makes you have to invest a little bit more into free agent spending. And, that's, I know Steve, talked about his job and his role in that. And it's the toughest role because, he's got to sign the front of the check. And so we want to make sure that we're making really good decisions on how to invest that.
Billy, with that, we will conclude our press conference. We'd like to thank you, Steve and Sandy, for participating and thank everybody for joining today's call. This will conclude today's Zoom, and we look forward to seeing and speaking to everybody down the road. Everybody stay well.
Welcome back to our New York City studios. Jim Duquette alongside Andy Martino. A lot of takeaways from that press conference. Andy, I think one of the first things that stands out was the reporting structure and the runway. There's a lot of talk about that leading into this with Billy Eppler. What was your takeaway on that?
Well, it's interesting that he seems comfortable with potentially having a hire above him in a year or two. And it's interesting that they're leaving that open. Normally you would think, and Jim, you would even have more insight to this, and I was someone who's been in this kind of position, but when you take over a baseball operations department, it's your job as long as you have a contract, and hopefully you get another contract after that. So everyone here seems to have clearly discussed the fact that, we all know that Epler is close with David Stearns and that the Mets have had an interest there. We all know that a Brian Cashman even is available potentially in a year. So the Mets clearly aren't eliminating that sort of thing. And Epler does have the opportunity to make that back burner, because as much as we want to talk about that now, if the Mets are winning in a year or two, why would they go on an executive search? So it's still a great unknown, but it's not something they're ruling out. And I think the other piece, Jim, is people want to know what Sandy Alderson's role is. And it's clear that they've decided that Epler will be reporting to Alderson.
Right.
He might have reported directly to Cohen. I can tell you that wasn't decided as of Monday night when they chose him. So that's a decision that they've made as well. I don't know what you think of that.
No, I thought that was interesting. I do think, though, maybe using how they treated, how Zach Scott and his role evolved, when he took over in his relationship with Sandy, I think that's almost a precursor to how I would look at it with Billy Eppler is there'll be a period of time where he's going to report directly to Sandy. Sandy, I'm sure, will be more involved. And as he gets more familiar with the roster, there'll be more leeway for him to be making the decisions and having Sandy kind of move back, into a more, let's say, advisory role. I would say that's probably the best way to describe that. And at the end of the day, I think it's Billy's job to show that he doesn't need to have or welcome in a person above him, in a year's time, that maybe that they could add depth below him, which I think they are lacking in a little bit. What was your feeling when Billy's talk about the pitching? Because that's obviously something that they really need to bulk up on. How aggressive do you think that the Mets will be in the free agent market?
I think they're going to be. We know they're going to be aggressive in the free agent market, all told, right? And they're not afraid to spend. And this is going to be a new kind of Met offseason that we haven't seen in a long time that way. And the fact that he mentioned pitching specifically right out of the gate tells you that that's where their immediate priority is. Now, the top of the rotation options are limited. Guys, the Mets don't want to assign a guy like Robbie Ray, who has a qualifying offer attached to him. So you look at guys like Kevin Gausman, Max Scherzer. Those guys will absolutely be in play, and I would expect get offers from the Mets, and then they'll drill down and look for pitching depth as well. But they understand, and any of us understands, that when we look at the Mets roster, especially with the health questions around Jacob deGrom and the fact that Marcus Stroman is a free agent, they need multiple starting pitchers. And they just need innings covered, whether it's starting pitchers or relievers. But that is a priority, should be a priority. And I know before Epler even arrived, when I was covering the GM meetings, Jim, pitching was absolutely top of mind for the Mets baseball operations.
I mean, listen, they have question marks, with Carrasco. They have a little bit question marks with Taiwan Walker, too, certainly down the stretch. I think if, when you look at their depth overall in the roster, if you can get enough pitching to have Peterson and McGill maybe move down in 6 or 7, I think that's an area of certainly that would add to their depth. No question on that. Do we have a... Okay, we do. So let's welcome in now the new general manager of the New York Mets. Billy Eppler is with us. Billy, nice to see you. Congratulations, Jim Duquette, Andy Martino. Let me start with this. You talked about the organization and trying to build a complete organization. And, in that role, that's obviously going to be very, very important, as well as building out the roster. But how do you go about that? Give us some more detail on that, if you would. And are you going to be allowed to bring in a couple of people that you know from outside the organization to complement what's already in existence?
Yeah, and Jim, awesome to see you again. You don't have to introduce yourself, but it's really good to reconnect with you. But as far as the organization, what we're going to try to do is build this best-in-class scouting and development, performance analytics. They call it performance analytics, performance science, and then this analytics platform, and really kind of drive the underbelly of the organization, so that as we evolve, and look into free agency, that free agency can be more of an opportunity than a necessity. And so, I want to get to know a little bit more intimately a lot of the people within baseball operations here, and understand what their role is, how they view the baseball world, how they look at player development, how they look at player evaluation, how they look at coaching, et cetera, et cetera. And so, based on that, and kind of based on some of the feedback, that'll give me a little bit of a clue of maybe what we need to complement in those efforts. I'm a huge believer in the power of people. I think having a lot of people creates an environment where to use an older adage that the right idea is going to be in the room, and that's what I'm wanting to encourage, is this environment of a lot of questions and a lot of dialogue, and to really kind of pull back and understand every element or every angle of a particular decision.
Billy, you brought up pitching, obviously, right out of the gate, and we know the Mets have some needs in the rotation. But when you look at constructing a pitching staff, are you looking at as we have rotation holes to fill and we need starting pitchers specifically, or are you looking at more like we need to cover innings? You look at the way the Braves just won the World Series. It wasn't necessarily about their rotation. So is it not as simple as, hey, they need 2 or 3 starters? Could you look at a bunch of different ways to tackle filling those innings this year?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, Andy, because I think it's done in service of both. So definitely want to add some starting pitching, and would love to add 2, maybe even 3. I think covering, the amount of starts and the amount of innings that we're going to need to cover over the course of a 162 game season. We need to try to have as many people in that rotation that we think can give us a number of starts, upwards of 25, 26 starts. But at the same token, when you approach a particular game, and you get this a little bit more of a luxury of this in a postseason, or at least if you have, maybe even in the regular season, if you have a situation in your schedule where you maybe have 2 off days in one particular week, you can approach a game this way. But at the end of the day, keeping it in its simplest form is 27 outs, and we're just trying to rip outs away from the other team and take their outs away as quickly as possible. And so, it's beautiful sometimes when you only have to use a pitcher or 2 to get through that. But in the reality is you might end up using 4, 5, 6 pitchers to do that. At the end of the day, we just want to take their outs away. And to do that, we need to make sure we have a strong pitching staff from 1 to 12, 1 to 13, however you compose your roster.
Yeah, Billy, I'm curious, because you mentioned about the managerial search and in talking to your staff first, coming up with criteria, and that's obviously something that you want to do, and I think stick to that. Obviously, it helps in the decision-making process. I am curious, though, because you've been in the game a long time and you've had established relationships with certain people. Do you have a list of names? I know a lot of GMs like to carry that list of names and add to it, cross off names. Do you have a list that you have in mind?
Yeah, to a degree, yes. There are a number of people I've been exposed to, whether it's been under the same roof or even across the diamond, and watching people work and in your conversations that you have with some of your colleagues around the game, they might drop a breadcrumb or 2 that if you write it down or remember to follow up with that, kind of creates this potential applicant pool. But again, I do want to establish the criteria first, because I think that if you establish the criteria, it helps kind of narrow it down so that you're not interviewing 25 people for the job. And you can establish this criteria, and then it also serves as a framework for evaluating the candidate. And if we evaluate, or a particular person within the interview has to just evaluate him on that particular element or that particular criteria, and then you kind of pool that at the end. I think that's a little bit more of a process-based way of going through the managerial interview.
So Billy, now that you've been on the job about 14 hours or so, I'm going to ask you directly, do you have interest in retaining 2 of your own free agents, Javier Baez and Marcus Stroman? And then more broadly from that, how challenging is it to have your own personal evaluation internally here in a job that you just started?
Yeah, as far as the free agents from the Mets, I definitely want to engage, with their agents, and just get a sense of kind of where they're at, and make that call appropriately based on the information I get back, and then to the larger point. This afternoon I've already scheduled a Zoom call with our senior baseball ops guys, and want to hear their perspective, get a sense of who they've already engaged with, what kind of information they maybe have gleaned from other clubs, and what other clubs want to do. So that process of learning our infrastructure. We'll also kind of go in conjunction with being plugged into the free agent and the trade market.
Billy, we'll let you get started here on your day. You got a long one certainly ahead of you. Congratulations again. We'll be in touch down the road.
All right. Good to see you guys. Thanks.
Good to see you, Billy. Billy Eppler, the general manager there of the New York Mets. Your reaction to the conversation about the manager, I thought was interesting. We've had our own kind of speculation in that area.
It shows that he's, I think, authentically collaborative and process-based, because this is something we were talked about on Baseball Night New York last night, and I had some reporting on, and this idea that, okay, who's on his list? Who's it going to be? And is it Buck Showalter? Can we make a slideshow on a website about a list of guys? He's really not quite computing it that way. He's like, he acknowledges that he has people who he thinks might be good, but he really does want to know what his assistant GMs, scouting directors, people, Sandy Alderson, all these people, what do they think? What are they looking for? And if they tell him we want like a plug-and-play guy who's done it a million times like Buck Showalter, then he's got Buck Showalter and John Farrell, who he's interviewed and been impressed by. If they tell him we want somebody who, I think it's called probabilistic now, the analytics-based game management, kind of, then you know that Joe Espada can be a guy like that, and there's a few other people. It tells me that he has a genuine interest in knowing what the Mets already want.
Well, and when we were putting together lists, and hiring managers, the criteria was important in case you got off track. So I liked some of the things that he said, sitting with his group. And is it, like he said, a plug-and-play guy that can manage a roster and do in-game management, or is it a little bit more collaborative? Is he willing to, accept recommendations from the front office when it comes to lineups? Is it the guy whose really a strength is player relations and clubhouse culture? I think all of those things. You come up with your own list. They're all unique. What was I think important in Los Angeles is certainly going to be different in New York. So I think that including this front office, I think is important. His idea about he didn't really say that he was going to bring in anybody. I suspect that he'll stay with this group, this current group, and then do his own evaluation. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, it is. I think obviously arriving so late in an off season, he's going to have to trust the people around him for now. And the Mets were not looking for somebody to come in and blow up baseball operations. This is one of the reasons why Theo Epstein was not a fit, because he wants at some point to strip an organization down to the studs and build it up in his image, and that's great. But the Mets feel internally like they've made a lot of progress. They made analytics hires, Tommy Tanis and his amateur and international department. They don't want to do anything with. They're very happy that the team is there. So they were looking for a guy to come in and be okay with what was here. And of course, as the years go on, if he and Steve Cohen, ultimately it'll be Epler and Cohen who are here likely longer than Sandy Alderson. If Epler and Cohen form that long-term connection, then Epler will have influence on who comes in. But in terms of bringing an assistant GM or somebody with him now, look, the Mets have several assistant GMs. Right. The Mets have departments that are set and in place, and they wanted a good baseball guy to come in and manage those departments already in place and be a decision maker, and that's what they've gotten in Epler.
A lot of conversation, a lot of the one term that kept coming up, depth, roster depth. Mm-hmm. We've seen that over the last couple of years, unfortunately, with this roster, is they haven't had the depth, primarily because they don't have a strong farm system, but they also didn't build their roster to, like you see with other large revenue teams, Dodgers or Yankees or any of them that are 30 deep, 35 deep. And I think that's something that, as this winter goes, they've already committed $185 million or so to the roster. It sounds like because of the added depth and because of the quality that they're looking for, they're going to be spending well over that luxury tax number.
Oh, yes. So clearly money will not be a factor. And that's how you get that high-end depth, too. Someone from the Mets front office, Jim, said to me last offseason, look at what the Dodgers pay for AAA players. If you were to analyze it, they probably have one of the highest AAA payrolls. And the Dodgers, this is how when the Mets analyzed the Dodgers, they were looking at this is a team that gets to where they get, not just because they have Mookie Betts, but because roster spots 20 through 30 and beyond are strong and solid. When people get hurt, you can plug someone else in. You're willing to pay generously, not just for the star free agents, but for the depth pieces. And actually, I think the Mets did a decent job of that last winter. And when you had that bench mob time when it was for the best part of their season, Bryn Alderson's pro scouting department actually was very successful in building that kind of depth. It's just the Mets had plenty of other problems over the course of the year that develop. But depth, actually, they see it as a priority, and they're still looking to spend there.
That is true. In fairness, they did have a lot of depth. They went through it. They blew through a lot because of injuries. I mean, they really didn't have an awful lot in terms of from the medical side. That's an area that he'll certainly have to address. I tell you what, just watching the press conference, I think, when you look at it, you have a degree of confidence, I think, with Billy, a guy that's experienced. I'm glad they went down that route of getting the experienced guy versus someone who maybe didn't have that experience, where you were going to have to grow in the job. I think with Billy, and are confident that you're going to be jumping right in. He's going to be jumping right in, this afternoon, like he talked about.
Yeah, and one thing, I've learned a lot in covering this game, and these are things that you've known well before I had to learn them, was how much you need to know about a baseball organization in order to be a general manager, right? And I'm sitting here next to a former GM speaking to this, but you're talking about overseeing amateur and international, pro scouting, research and development, analytics, all these things. And if you're coming in, if you're a good person, like, say, Adam Cromie, who is the former assistant GM of the Nats, who is a strong candidate here, he couldn't make up for the fact that he hadn't done that. He'd been a part of one of those departments, but he hadn't been able to oversee all of them. It's where there was a learning curve for a Brody Van Wagenen, even though he was a smart guy who came in with big ideas. It's like, it's a particular kind of company, a baseball team, right?
Right.
And it helps to have experience running one, and Epler has.
Yeah, no question on it. That concludes our coverage of today's proceedings. More coverage tonight on BNNY at 6 p.m. Eastern. For Andy Martino, I'm Jim Duquette. Thanks for watching.